close your eyes. That sound you're hearing, that isn't a foreign army invading American soil. That is America turning its guns on itself. July 1863. A town of 2,400 people, 3 days, 50,000 dead, wounded, or missing. They wore 2 different colors, but they spoke the same language, prayed to the same God. And when the pain became unbearable, they called for their mothers in the same voice. Gettysburg wasn't just a battle. It was the moment America looked in the mirror and watched itself bleed. We're taught that Gettysburg was a military turning point, a pivotal engagement, a decisive moment in the Civil War. Arrows on maps, the names of generals, casualty numbers arranged neatly in textbooks. But if you only see Gettysburg as a map, you'll miss the most terrifying thing about it. Because here, war stopped being an abstraction. It walked into people's kitchens. It lay down on their front steps. It tracked mud across the floors of families who never thought history would knock on their door. And behind the blue and the gray was a wound America had been refusing to look at for decades: slavery, and the question of whether a nation built on the promise of freedom could survive while holding millions of people in chains. Gettysburg didn't come from a misunderstanding. It came from generations of fury, failed compromise, economics, race, and a promise of liberty that America had never actually kept. But on the battlefield, those grand ideas didn't arrive as speeches. They arrived as 18 and 19-year-old boys shaking inside uniforms that didn't quite fit. As a letter never sent home. As a young girl standing at a window, watching her world disappear piece by piece. Her name was Tillie Pierce. That morning, she was still just a teenager in a quiet Pennsylvania town. A half-eaten breakfast, a familiar street, a summer sky so blue it almost felt cruel. But before the sun went down, her town would no longer be a town. It would become the place where America learned how fast a nation can shatter itself. The morning of July 1st, 1863, Gettysburg had no idea what it was about to become. It was just a small town in Pennsylvania. Dirt roads, wooden fences, fields coming into season, houses with white curtains, and the smell of fresh bread. History doesn't always arrive like thunder. Sometimes it arrives like dust on the road. In the distance, shapes began to appear on the horizon. At first, just gray smudges against the sky. Then the sound of hooves, wagon wheels grinding over dry earth, the faint rattle of metal against belts and rifle stocks. The people of Gettysburg looked out their windows. Some pulled the curtains closed. A mother placed her hand on her child's shoulder, said nothing, but gripped tight enough that the child understood something was very wrong. Confederate soldiers came in from the west. Most of them looked nothing like the heroes in the paintings. They were exhausted, dust-covered, boots worn through, coats faded by months of rain and sun. Some walking like one more step might finally bring them down. Some accounts say they came looking for shoes or supplies rumored to be in town. But what they came for mattered less than the fact that they came. And right behind them, Union soldiers. A single shot rang out, not glorious, nothing like the movies, just a short, dry crack that split the morning open. From that one small sound, a storm began to open its mouth. For the generals, this was an unexpected engagement. For the soldiers, it was the moment they realized they were no longer marching. They were standing in front of death. On the hills and fields surrounding town, lines of men broke apart and reformed. Orders were shouted, Horses panicked. Gun smoke drifted low across the grass, settling on skin like a bitter fog. But inside the homes of Gettysburg, a different fear was rising. The fear of civilians, of people with no uniform, no weapon, no way out, and no choice but to stay inside a battle they hadn't chosen. Tillie Pierce watched soldiers running through the streets. She had heard about war before, from newspapers, from adults, from stories told in serious voices at the dinner table. But hearing about war is not the same as watching a man press his hand to a wound and beg for water. It's not the same as seeing a boy too young to shave slumped against a fence post, staring at nothing, as if his body had simply stopped listening to him. It's not the same as hearing your mother whisper, "Don't look." But she looked anyway, because children sometimes see the truth more clearly than adults. For Tillie, war was no longer North or South, no longer ideology or strategy. It was a stranger lying on her doorstep, a streak of mud across the floor, a cup of water trembling in her hands as she gave it to a soldier whose name she would never know. And that was the moment her innocence began to crack. War doesn't knock. It walks straight into the living room, bringing road dust, blood, sweat, and the ragged breathing of men who were not ready to die. The second day didn't begin with a crescendo. It began with waiting, a silence heavier than gunfire. On the hillsides, soldiers cleaned their rifles. One man unfolded a letter from home and read it again, though he already knew every word by heart. Another pulled a small photograph from his breast pocket, wiped the dust from the face inside, then tucked it away like a piece of a life he was no longer sure he'd get back. Across the line, men did the same. They also read letters, also missed home, also were afraid. This is the most disturbing truth about Gettysburg. The men preparing to kill each other were not as different as they'd been taught to believe. They shared the same small longings: a kitchen, a younger sibling, a dirt road winding back to a farm, a promise that said, "I'll come home." But when the artillery began, those small things started getting crushed under something larger than any of them: the Wheatfield, a name that sounds like life, like harvest, bread, dinner, the hands of working people. But on the second day of Gettysburg, it became a place no one entered and left unchanged. Thousands of men were pulled into it. Gun smoke swallowed their sight lines. Commands disappeared inside the noise. Uniforms, formations, unit lines, all of it blurred. There were moments when soldiers no longer knew if they were advancing or retreating, couldn't tell if the voice beside them was an order or a cry for help, couldn't tell if the hands grabbing them were friends or enemies. When the ammunition ran out, war fell back into the oldest human language: steel, wood, stone, ragged breath, shaking hands. You don't need to describe war with enormous images. Sometimes a single detail is enough. A soldier losing his cap and bending down to pick it up while bullets passed overhead, as if keeping hold of the cap was the last remaining piece of order in his world. Another man trying to drag his friend behind a tree, only to find that the tree had already been torn apart by gunfire. Somewhere in the smoke, one soldier may have shot a man whose name he never knew, but he heard the voice, the same rural drawl, the same cry for his mother when the pain went past what a man could hold. And for one brief moment, before survival instinct pushed him forward again, he understood what he had just done. He hadn't only killed an enemy, he had wounded a part of his own country. That is the moral collapse of Gettysburg. Not that men suddenly became monsters, But that war placed them somewhere that to survive another few seconds, they had to do things the human part of them could never accept. On Little Round Top, the pressure was different. Not just the fear of being killed, but the fear that if you stepped back, everything behind you would collapse. The men who held that position didn't hold it because they were made of stone. They held because the man next to them was holding. Because no one wanted to be the first to turn away. Because in war, courage isn't always the absence of fear. Sometimes it's just being too exhausted to run. The morning of July 3rd arrived with a strange quiet. Not peace, just a breath held for too long. Robert E. Lee looked across the valley toward Cemetery Ridge. On a map, it was a position to take, a defensive line to break, a decision that could change the course of the war. But maps don't know heat. Maps don't know fear. Maps don't know what a soldier feels standing in an open field, staring at the artillery waiting for him on the other side. Approximately 12,000 Confederate soldiers prepared to advance. From a distance, the sight could almost be mistaken for something beautiful. Perfect formations, flags catching the sunlight, drum beats, steady footsteps across open ground. This is the kind of image history loves to romanticize. But step closer. Look at the face of one soldier in that line. He doesn't see beauty. He sees distance. 1.5 miles of open field. No trees, no stone walls, no cover from the eyes of Union artillery. He knows it. Every man around him knows it. And yet they walk. Not because they don't understand death, but because in that moment, a common soldier rarely has the right to argue with a general's dream. This is the dark heart of Pickett's charge. 12,000 men walking into a decision they never got to vote on. And the heaviest sentence of the battle doesn't need to be a declaration. Just this: General Lee did not walk across that field. His soldiers walked for him. Confederate artillery opened first. A massive roar tore across the Pennsylvania sky. The ground shuddered. Smoke rolled down the hillsides, but the Union side waited. That waiting was more terrifying than any explosion, because it said, "We know you're coming, and we'll let you get close enough." As the lines began to move, time seemed to slow. One soldier adjusted his pack straps. Another touched the photograph in his pocket. Some prayed quietly. Some said nothing, because every word had become too small for that field. Then Union artillery opened fire. No need to describe it in dramatic detail. Just watch the way a line of men in steady march suddenly opens up into gaps. The way a flag falls, and someone immediately picks it up. The way one soldier turns to find his friend, but where his friend was standing there is now only smoke and scattered earth. They kept advancing, because turning back might get you killed. Standing still might get you killed. Moving forward at least gave the feeling that your death had a direction. That is the cruelty of glory. It makes men believe that if they march with enough precision, dying will mean something. When the surviving Confederate soldiers finally reached the stone wall, every notion of beauty was gone. No perfect formations, no steady drums. Just smoke, screaming, dust, and men trying to cross the last few yards as if those yards contained the entire fate of the world. Some of them touched the wall. Many never reached it. Pickett's charge failed. But failed is too clean a word for what actually happened. It reads like a line in a military textbook. The reality is that thousands of men were destroyed in a single afternoon, not for lack of courage, but because of a pride that refused to recognize the limits of human beings. And when Lee met the survivors returning from the field, Many of them were no longer the men who had stepped off that morning. They were still breathing. But something had stayed behind in the grass. Gettysburg was no longer just a battle. It had become a question. How much blood can a nation demand from its young men before it admits that glory is just the beautiful word the living put on the sacrifice of the dead? When the last shot faded, Gettysburg was not released. It only stepped into a different kind of hell. For 3 days, the town had been swallowed by cannon fire. But after the battle, the most haunting sounds were not explosions anymore. They were small sounds, people calling out names in the dark, the tearing of cloth into bandages, the shuffling of exhausted townspeople moving house to house, checking who was still alive. The low voices of surgeons, sleepless for days, forced to decide who had a chance and who was already beyond what medicine could reach. Churches were no longer churches, schools were no longer schools, living rooms were no longer living rooms. All of it became the same place, where people tried to pull life back from death with crude instruments, trembling hands, and never enough anesthetic. Here, war lost all its abstraction. It had a smell, wet earth, sweat, antiseptic, and something else. Something spread in white powder over things no one wanted to name. But there was something heavier than the smell of death. It was the weight of compassion under pressure. A woman of Gettysburg, who yesterday had only worried about feeding her own family, now knelt beside a stranger in a uniform she didn't recognize, listening to him call for his mother. She didn't know which side he fought for. In that moment, it barely mattered. He was just a son who was afraid, and she was the only person close enough to hear him. Another resident walked into her kitchen to find her dining table had become a surgical table. The china was still on the shelf. The child's small chair still sat in the corner. The ordinary pieces of a life still stood in place, quiet, as if they couldn't understand why the same hands that had set them there now held instruments instead of silverware. That's what makes Gettysburg truly terrifying, not its enormity, its familiarity. A small town, a kitchen, a spoon, a window, a summer morning. And then history stepped inside and left everything standing, but nothing the same. Outside, the burial work began. There wasn't enough time. There weren't enough men. There weren't enough prayers for all of them. Graves were dug in haste. Names were lost. Letters never reached their destinations. Some families received a single cold notice. Others received nothing. Only a silence that stretched on for years. Then the July rain came down. Rain can clean the dust from the grass. It can cool the scorched ground. It can wash away the tracks on the roads. But rain cannot clean memory. It couldn't make Tillie Pierce the girl she was on the morning of July 1st. It couldn't make the houses forget the sounds they had heard in the night. It couldn't make America forget that for 3 days, Americans had looked at Americans down the barrel of a gun. Gettysburg ended on the map, but in the minds of the survivors, it had only just begun. 4 months later, Abraham Lincoln came to Gettysburg, not to celebrate, not to turn the dead into glittering victory. He came to a place that still carried the smell of fresh earth and loss. Before him, graves. Rows of graves, names carved in haste, mounds of new dirt, families standing motionless as if breathing too hard might finally break them open. Lincoln had brought a short speech, only a few hundred words, no fanfare, no tactical recap, no parade of unit names and military honors. He didn't turn the dead into props for glory. He did something harder. He forced America to stand in front of those graves and ask, If this nation was born on a promise of freedom, what does that promise mean when it must be rewritten in the blood of its own people? Lincoln didn't heal the wound of Gettysburg. No one could do that in an afternoon. But he named it. He transformed this ground from a battlefield into a warning. That those who died here did not fall for a line on a map. They fell in a deeper struggle, whether a republic could survive the contradiction between its ideals of liberty and its practice of oppression. That is why the Gettysburg Address still lives, not because it made the pain disappear, but because it refused to let the pain become meaningless. Still, we should not romanticize that moment. A speech cannot make the dead rise, cannot give back limbs to the wounded, cannot erase from Tillie Pierce's dreams what she saw with her own eyes, cannot stop the families of the North and the South from waiting for the knock on the door that brings the worst news. Lincoln's words did not stitch America back together overnight. They placed a needle in the hands of a trembling nation and said, "If you don't start sewing, this tear will only widen." And history proved exactly that. The Civil War did not end at Gettysburg. Slavery did not vanish because of one battle. Hatred did not dissolve because of one speech. But Gettysburg forced America to see the real cost of delaying justice for too long. A nation can avoid the truth for decades. But eventually, the truth will find a field, a town, a generation of young men, and it will make everyone pay. Today, the cannons at Gettysburg are silent. The grass has grown back. The roads are clear of war's dust. Tourists walk the fields with cameras and maps and historical markers. But some places, no matter how quiet they become, are never truly silent. The Wheatfield still carries the name of harvest. Little Round Top still looks down over green valleys. Cemetery Ridge still lies beneath the Pennsylvania sky. But if you stand there long enough, you start to understand why Gettysburg has never fully belonged to the past. Because it doesn't only ask, what happened here? It asks something far more difficult. How long does it take for human beings to stop seeing their neighbors as enemies? How long can a civilization trust its own decency before fear, power, and hatred peel back the thin surface it keeps over what's underneath? How long can a nation turn against itself before it begins to destroy itself from within? Gettysburg is not a story of one side winning and one side losing. It is the story of a country that had to stand in its own blood before it could understand that freedom cannot survive if people only protect it for those who look like them. History doesn't repeat itself perfectly. It doesn't come back wearing the same uniforms, carrying the same rifles, marching under the same flags. It comes back in the way people talk about each other, in the way they turn the other side into something less than human, in the way they forget that across every divide there is still a person who knows fear, who knows pain, who knows what it means to miss home, and who, when everything falls apart, calls for the same people. That is what Gettysburg leaves behind, not glory, not the romance of war, but a cold and lasting warning. The past does not disappear just because we build monuments over it. It stays under the grass, in the memory, in the questions that every generation must answer again from the beginning. 3 days at Gettysburg didn't only show what Americans did to each other. It showed what human beings can become when ideology loses its compassion. And perhaps that is why this place still silences us. Because when we look at Gettysburg, we are not looking at a battlefield. We are looking into a mirror. And the face looking back at us is still our own.